This video is the 26th part in my project to recreate Kings Island in Parkitect. In this part of the project, I'm focusing my attention on recreating Kings Island's Giga Coaster, Orion. For now, Orion is Kings Island's newest roller coaster, at least until next year in 2024. Orion opened at Kings Island on July 2nd, 2020. Orion stands at 287 feet tall with a drop of 300 feet. Orion has a max speed of 91 miles per hour and features a track length of 5,321 feet. Orion was manufactured by Bolliger and Maviard, the same manufacturer as rides like Diamondback, Fury 325, and Leviathan at Canada's Wonderland. There's actually quite a lot of debate about Orion's status as a Giga Coaster or a Hypercoaster. You see, the ride is 287 feet tall, but it has a drop of 300 feet. This is because the ride's lift hill is situated on a hill, so the bottom of the first drop is actually lower than most of the terrain. So my first order of business for this part of the project was to edit all the terrain around the ride. It took me a while until I was happy with how the terrain looked, and then I began work on some of the queue. But this does beg the question, what exactly is a Giga Coaster? Is a Giga Coaster a coaster that stands 300 feet tall? Or has a 300-foot drop? This is a widely debated subject. When Cedar Point debuted Millennium Force in 2000, they claimed a Giga Coaster was a coaster with a height of 300 feet, although that criteria certainly doesn't apply to Orion. I refer to it as a Giga Coaster because of its max speed and its drop. I think it feels pretty similar to Millennium Force and other Giga Coasters, so I don't see why not. At the end of the day, I don't think it matters what this ride is classified as. I think it's just a fun thing to debate. Let me know whether you think this ride should be classified as a Giga Coaster or a Hyper Coaster down in the comments below. At this point in the footage, I basically have the queue done, so I placed the station, changed the coaster's colors to blue and white, and I began work on the ride layout. For the entirety of this project so far, I've been using Google Earth to get measurements for ride track, but for this ride I used a different approach. I already had my recreation of the racer finished, so I used that as a landmark to see which elements would go where. I still use Google Earth, but instead of using measurements, I kind of eyeballed it, but overall I'm really happy with how it turned out. I would tell myself, okay, this element needs to go past racer's turnaround, and this element needs to go before racer's turnaround. I gave myself a lot more creative liberty with this recreation, and I think that allowed me to get the shaping of elements almost perfect. I did run into a couple problems though. The biggest one was the angle of turns. I was planning to just use the default Parkitect coaster builder. That only allows for 45 and 90 degree turns. Orion has a couple weird 10 and 15 degree turns, so I needed to use a mod to recreate those. Throughout this footage, you're going to see me struggling with the mod track edit, which I used to recreate these angles. It is very buggy, and it's a very difficult mod to use, but it gave me the results I wanted. When you see me moving the white nodes above the track, that's the mod track edit. Those little white nodes usually aren't in the game. The second biggest problem was the lift hill. When it comes to uphill inclines, Parkitect gives you a few options. Either 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 60 degrees, or 90 degrees. Unfortunately, the lift hill on Orion is none of these angles. I believe it's close to a 35 or 40 degree angle, but unfortunately that angle is still in between two of the options. At first I used the 30 degree angle for the lift hill because I thought it looked a little bit more realistic. Unfortunately, this meant the ride had a drop below 300 feet. It valleyed about halfway through the layout. Near the end of this footage you'll see me delete the lift hill and replace it with a steeper lift hill and drop, but somehow the ride still didn't have enough speed to make it throughout the layout. In real life, Orion has a trim brake on the second airtime hill, but instead of a trim brake, I placed a launch there to speed up the ride a little bit. This small launch gives the ride a tiny boost at about 20 miles per hour, I believe. It isn't much, but it's just enough to get the ride through the rest of the layout. Orion has a very long layout with a lot of track, and I think due to the way Parkitect applies friction to the ride, it loses a lot of speed throughout that layout. Thankfully, with the taller drop and the launch section, Orion is just barely able to make it through the layout. It was very important to me that the pacing of the ride in the recreation is similar to the ride in real life, and thankfully I achieved that. Another hurdle I had was the final brake run. In real life, Orion's brake run is angled at about 5 degrees towards the station, so the turn back into the station isn't so big. I didn't realize this until after I made the brake run, so I had to remake it a couple times in order to get it perfect. You'll see in the footage I complete the brake run and then I just stare at it for a little bit in confusion as to why that turn is so big. I then deleted it and retried a couple times. I eventually got it though. A lot of these videos you see are made possible by my supporters on Patreon, so I'd like to give a quick thank you to this month's supporters, AceFusty138 and Ian M. If you'd like to support this channel on Patreon, there's a link to my Patreon page down in the video description. Right here, you can see the changes in the brake run I was talking about earlier. It took me a couple tries to get it right, especially the angle heading towards the station, but eventually I got it, and I think it looks pretty good. Just a reminder, you can feel free to use any rides you see in these videos in your own Park and Parkitect. All of the rides you see in these videos are available for download for free on the Steam Workshop. There's a link to my page on the Steam Workshop in the description of this video. Now that Orion's ride layout itself is complete, I begin work on the ride station building, queue buildings, queue shelters, and all forms of decorations around the ride. There's a large pre-show type building in the ride's queue, and that was a lot of fun to recreate. And now that the buildings are complete, all that's left are some details on the terrain and some foliage. I added trees around the ride based on where they were on Google Earth, and on Google Earth you could still see where they dug for the footers of the ride, so I tried to replicate that in Parkitect. I know that you can't see the dirt anymore in real life, but I like the new ride look. I tried to give it the look that it was just put there. but I might change that later. And here you can see the changes to the lift hill and the drop I was referencing earlier. I think this angle for the lift hill is a little too steep and a little unrealistic, but the ride really needs the speed to get through the layout. It valleyed multiple times in testing, and I could barely get it to make it to the brake run. So yes, I know it might look a little silly, but trust me, it needs that extra speed. Parkitect does not like long coasters. And now, here's the finished product. Here's an off-ride POV of my recreation of Orion at Kings Island. Well, that's all for this part of the project. If you'd like to see more parts, there's a link to the playlist in the description of this video. Like always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.